Welcome back to Rich Dad StockCast. I'm your host, Denney, and today we're diving into one of the most misunderstood and underutilized ideas in wealth building. It's a lesson straight from Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The rich invent money. Now, most people think you need money to make money, but the wealthy, they think differently. They create opportunity where others see none. They use knowledge, creativity, and strategy to generate income from thin air. And to help us break this all down, I'm joined by, once again, Rich Hat expert Andy Tanner. Andy has mastered the art of turning financial education into real world results, and he's here to share exactly how this concept works in practice. Now, before we get started, head over to stockcastbonus.com and grab your free investing tools. If you're ready to think differently about money, that's the first place to go. Andy, welcome back to the show.
Del, thanks for having me. What a great topic this is. And it's so true that money's created. And I think I have some valuable things to share on this idea. Something that I've thought a lot about ever since I first read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And in the very first chapter, Robert talks about creating money with a really funny story we might reference. So great topic and great to be here.
All right, I'm excited for that. And speaking of value, I want to go back to stockcastbonus.com. What do our listeners receive when they go there?
Yeah, we've got a really cool free download. We've got an ebook right there right now, and the feedback on it's been great because it really helps people act. There's been there's so much great content for people to learn, but the balance that I've seen between learning and doing often leans a little bit more towards the learning side and a little light on the doing side. And people can consume a lot of knowledge, but for some reason they struggle to get over the hump of actually, okay, what are the daily things I can do to start building assets? How do I actually, and creating money, today's topic is going to be a big part of that. You buy assets with cash, and there's lots of different ways to control an asset. But that particular download is really powerful because it gives people actionable activities that they can do, even if you don't have any money right now. If you're starting out at square one, square zero, it doesn't matter. Okay, what do I do if I have nothing? What are there things I could do to advance my, towards my goals today, even if I had nothing? And the answer to that's yes. So no matter where you are, where you stand, there's these activities that you can start to do, and it's for people that want to take action and are tired of listening and want to get doing. That StockCast bonus is for them. So that's a great place to go.
All right, fantastic. Bunch of value there. Speaking of value, one of the big lessons that we pull from the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the rich invent money. Now, Andy, what does that actually mean? Are they printing out paper? What's going on here?
Well, a lot of rich people do print money. The Fed has a lot of it. They print it. They have a keystroke. They just invent it with a keystroke. So they certainly, fiat currency is just declared, right? They say this is money, and therefore it's been invented. But in the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I thought it was great. There's a story in there, if people remember, and if memory serves, they had toothpaste tubes, and back in the day, I guess they had some lead in them. Imagine that. Let's make our toothpaste tubes and put lead in them. And so they made a mold. Robert and his buddy made a mold, and they melted down this stuff and started making nickels, lead nickels. And they said, "What are you doing here?" He goes, "We're making money." Literally making money, creating currency, right? And that's really what they were doing. They weren't really making real money. They were printing a currency of sorts, a counterfeit currency. But the idea wasn't too far off. We want to create some cash, and there's some process to do that. And I think there's some principles that we often call them generalized principles that bring cash as a result of what we do, and it's almost processional. Meaning that procession is almost like the honeybee is going out and it's getting nectar from the from the flowers, so it can go make its honey, and that's what it thinks it's doing. But in reality, it doesn't realize it's pollinating too. And in its efforts, everything gets pollinated and everything gets served very well. And the bee, there might not be a bee alive that knows how important that pollination really is to all of us. And it's processional. It's out there doing what it thinks it should do, but it's having a ripple effect at 90 degrees that, the bee might not even realize it. Well, I think it's a lot the same here, that if we can buy into a couple of generalized principles, money's invented as a result of that. So we can talk a little bit about that in detail if you want.
Yeah. So, what does it mean to invent money, and how is it different from earning and saving it?
Well, let's start with this generalized principle. The more people that I serve, the more effective I become. That's a huge one. So if a person just didn't worry about money right now, they didn't worry about inventing money or making money, they just thought about that, kind of like the honeybee. Let's not think about pollination right now. Let's just think about nectar. Let's think about what flowers we visit. How many flowers do we visit? That's an interesting idea. How many people are you serving? And in your work life, if you have a boss, in a way, you're serving one. You go there and you have one person that's telling you what to do. You do what that person tells you to do, and you get a paycheck from that. So working for one person can get you one paycheck. Well, let's look at something different. I love the idea of Apple because it highlights how dumb I am. I have no idea how to build these iPads and iPods and computers and phones. I mean, to me, they're magical. The fact that they can do all these things in my pocket, and I often say this on our show, that if you put me in my garage and said, build one of these, I couldn't do it. I wouldn't even know how to start. It'd be no clue. And yet Steve Jobs put a team together and said, let's make 300 million iPads and put them around the world and have them do all these wonderful things. So he not only made one, imagine making 300 million of them, how hard that would be. And to do it so quickly that you could get them all out at the same time. I mean, it's quite a feat. So he served 300 million people. He served a customer rather than a boss. And it's very difficult to do that much for that many people without getting rich as a byproduct of it. The money's just created. There's a lot of different ways to create cash. What he did is he created a company, and that company, he said, look, I'll share it with you. I'll share ownership of my IP. I'll share it with you. And so when you take a company public, you invent millions and millions and millions and, well, billions of dollars. You just invent it. It wasn't there before. Now it is. Here was this thing that didn't exist. You created this company, take it public, and all of a sudden you just invented millions of an asset that is millions and millions of dollars now, billions. And that's really what it means in my mind as a stock guy to create money. There's this idea of watch this. You want another one, or is this too much? I'm too
No,
long-winded on this question.
no. I would love another one, and if it's like everyday people creating, even better.
Yeah. So let me give you another example that's really easy. When you make a promise to someone, the response of that is expectation. And when you keep that promise, the response is trust. So in our interaction of stimulus and response, you send out a promise, someone expects something, and if you keep that promise, there's trust. We'll think about the insurance business for a minute. My insurance company kept a promise not too long ago. My son was driving home from a basketball camp. He was slowing down to make a right-hand turn, and a woman had stolen a car, and she had gone through 5 jurisdictions, and the helicopters chasing her, and she's in the stolen car, and it's at night, after dusk, and they spike her tires in more of a residential area. Unfortunately, they had to stop her. She was driving like a maniac, and she runs a red light, and she goes head on into my son trying to make this right turn, totals both cars. And unfortunately, she didn't survive her injuries, and my son fortunately walked away. Well, I called the insurance company and I said, "Hey, you made me a promise. Keep it." And it's interesting because the insurance companies invent money that way. When they make me that promise, I pay them a premium for it, and so they invent money that way. And that's an interesting way to make money because there's no manufacturing costs, there's no shipping costs, there's no raw materials, so to speak. They have some cash, I guess, but that's how they invent money, is they simply make a promise, and people pay a premium for a promise. Well, I do that every day. I do it all the time. In fact, when it comes to stocks, I have two really big major parts of that income. And part of that is collecting premium from promises I make that are very valuable to people. And most of the promises that I make are like insurance promises, in that I very rarely have ever called the insurance company, very rarely, and said, "Hey, I need you to pay for this car," right? Very rarely does that happen. Most of the time, those promises expire and they just keep the premiums, right? And that's how their business is set up. They make far more promises than they have to keep, and they collect far more premiums than they pay out in claims, and that's where their profit is. Well, the same is true in the options market. I call it click and get paid. I simply make a promise, click, and someone pays me for this promise. The thing that's better about what I do, Dell, is I promise to buy things I want to buy anyway. And when they crash, they're not totaled. The price is down, but I'm not buying any wrecked cars. I'm actually buying great cars at great vehicles at a low price. So, for example, if you had Silicon Valley Bank go bankrupt and all the banks drop in price because everyone's worried about banking now. Oh, this one was bad. Maybe the others are. Well, now Citigroup is a bargain. It's down really low. So I promise to buy it if it goes down a little lower. And I click and I invent money by simply making a promise. And so, that's quite an invention of money, isn't it? Just money coming to my account, out of nowhere. Just click, boom, and it arrives at the speed of light instantly, simply because I promised to buy something cheaper. And that's called a cash secured put. So yeah, it's we could go on and on and on. Money is invented, create a company. Now you've created value and you've created an asset. And Robert used to talk a lot about this to my kids. When my kids were growing up, he'd say, "It's in here, guys." He'd always tell them this. He'd say, "It's in here. It's your creativity. It's created." And when you create value through your imagination and through your knowledge, that's where money's created. It's not earned; it's created. And what a beautiful idea that is. So most people can't do it because they don't value the knowledge. They value the result, but they don't value the process, which is why the internet is filled with people like me that, content creators, and people consume the content. But as we mentioned earlier, with StockCast bonus, people have a hard time with the action part. They have a hard time. It's pretty easy to click and watch a video. It's a little different to click and get paid. I prefer to click and get paid.
You and me both. Absolutely.
I'd rather click and have money come into my account than, TikTok come into my head. But teach their own.
I don't know. I might pay to see you do a dance on TikTok. I'm just throwing it out there.
That's not going to happen. That was not for sure. That's not value I'm going to create. That's for sure. But it's true. I mean, you think about artists. Someone, like take one of the, like a great singer. Who's a great singer? Like Mariah Carey, amazing singer, legendary, right? Well, she creates a song, and she creates the song. Well, now she creates an asset, and so it's creating an iPhone. Well, if you're not very creative, like Warren Buffett's not very creative, He's never invented an iPhone. He's never invented a Duracell battery. He's never invented an insurance company. He's never invented, he's really never invented or created anything. But what he did is he partnered with people who would share their creativity with him. And it doesn't matter if I'm not creative. If someone will share their creativity with me, it's called shares. Stock shares is what we call it. If Steve Jobs will say, "Look, Andy, I know you're not very creative, but I can create an iPad. I can create a phone, and I'll share that with you if you'll share with me. Buy some shares, and now I'll share my IP with you, and I'll share the profits that come and the money that's created when we create this cash called income. It's when it's created, I'll share it with you." So there's all kinds of ways to take part in this creative process. But when you buy shares of stock, what you're really buying and what you're really owning is the ability to serve more people, as we started the show with. The more people that you serve, the more effective you become. Well, I can serve a boss or I can serve the world. And when you become a shareholder, you can serve billions of people. And that the creation of that value. Another word for creation is producing. A production. We take something, we produce something, or we create something, we build something, whatever. And that's what's called the gross domestic product. What do we produce? What do we create here? The gross domestic product is creation. What are we producing? And just as real estate, a deed shows that you own a share of the world's land. I own a share of the world's land when I own real estate. Well, when I own stocks, I own a share of the world's production. I own a share of their creativity. And I want as much of that creativity as I can, because the more shares I have, that means the more people I'm serving, and the more people I serve, the more effective I become. So that's the gig. And it just takes knowledge to do that intelligently. If you don't do it intelligently, you can lose a lot of money because there's risk involved when you get in the creativity process or business.
Very much so. Well, let's do this. There's more questions that I want to ask you, but let's go to break real quick. Listener, we've talked about the mindset behind inventing money and how the rich create opportunity instead of waiting for it. And when we come back, Andy's going to show us how this concept applies to investing, especially in the stock market. And remember, if you're serious about improving your financial IQ, head to StockCastBonus.com. You'll find tools and resources that can help you think like an investor and act like the rich. Stick around. We'll be right back.
So far, it's been great. I needed a source where I could really enrich my education through stocks. I didn't really have an avenue for it, and it's helped me a lot. The simplicity has really gotten me on the track to where I enjoy the learning as well as it's really solidifying in my mind. And like, they're not just trying to sell you something. They really care about the people that are in the course, and they really do care about you and your personal goals, and what you want to do is to help you and your family and whatever your goals are in life through that. So it's really been great.
Welcome back to Rich Dad StockCast. We're here with Andy Tainer, breaking down how the rich invent money, and now it's time to talk how we can apply this principle in investing. So, how can someone invent money through the stock market? I love this question. I've been dying to ask you this question. So, how can someone invent money through stock investing?
It's really interesting. There's a lot of different ways wealth can be created. The way most people think about it, and it's not the way I like to do it, but it's probably worth mentioning because it's what most people think. Most people think it's created when you buy low and the price goes up. I buy it at $10, now it's at $20, and I've just created $10, and that's absolutely true. There's no question that that money wasn't there, and now it is. So it had to come from somewhere, right? And that money was created by the perceived value of the market. Now the market sees that stock is more valuable, and so they're going to pay more for it, and so now you've gone from 10 to 20. That's how most people think about it. It's not how I think about it at all. I think that's probably the worst way to go, because just as money can be created, it can also be destroyed. And as Robert says, there's always two sides to every coin. There's always a yin and a yang, a right hand and a left hand, an up and a down, right? And you get to the edge where you can see both sides. That's where you can get intel, right? Intelligence is on the edge of that coin. So if we're going to talk about creating money, we can also talk about destroying money. So you have a 401k, market falls apart. Well, now wealth was destroyed. It wasn't created, it was destroyed. So if you're going to play the game on that side of the coin where it's created, you have to also look at the other side where it could be destroyed. What I really like about the way I do it is there's a greater chance of the creation and a less chance of the destruction the way I do it. So, for example, if we look at a cash flow jack in the box, or you always tell people to put a goose or a
The golden egg,
emoji, some type of golden egg emoji. That's production. The price of the goose could fluctuate, but it's producing or creating eggs. And that's that miracle of creation. How in the world does this goose lay any kind of egg, let alone a golden egg, just a regular egg? It's kind of amazing production, right? And so I'd rather get paid that way. I'd rather get paid on that production than the ups and downs of price. So we divide these this money's created, and that's divided up. That creative process, money was created, and they divide it. In real estate, they distribute it. It's the same thing, exactly the same thing. Divide, dole out, divvy up, distribute, whatever you want to call it. You get your share of that cash. And I really like that. I'd rather have a stock that's had a dividend go up for 40 years in a row that's consistent in their track record than the stock that had their price go up and down all over the place for 40 years in a row. I just think there's a lot more consistency to be found when you look at wealth creation of a dividend. And then, as we referred to before the break, selling an option is an accelerator to your wealth. Now, you can certainly do a lot of capital gain stuff, and you can use leverage where you can get bigger credits for less cash. And we have all kinds of leverage we can do with that, with multiple leg options. And those that want to study it can study with us. But it's always the same. It's click and get paid. It's click and invent money. Click and invent money. And there's different metrics and leverages we can tap with that, but it's always the same. It's click and get paid. Click, money's created, and get paid. And it's a context issue. Robert's a master of context. And the hard part is to help people break the trance, the hypnotic trance they're in of go to school, work hard, get a job, work hard, put money in a 401k. It's just hard for them to get out of that job mentality where they serve their boss. Part of that, I think, is you're being taken care of by that boss, right? It's very parental like. I depended on my parents growing up to feed me. Now I depend on my boss to feed me, right? I've just basically switched who I answer to, and I had to do what my parents told me when I grew up, and I have to do what my boss tells me that I am grown up for 8 hours of my day. So it's just kind of a transfer of that mindset growing up. The idea of not having a job is terrifying for a lot of folks, and so they don't know how to create money, because the idea of that alchemy, starting with nothing and just creating, is really, really tough. So I really tried hard with my sons to give them that opportunity to do both. I don't know what they'll do, but I know that the money they've earned more money in their life so far by creating it than by working for it. And they'll have to figure that balance out for themselves as much as anyone else does, right? So it's a context issue. It's how you think. And I just remember, again, so vividly how many times Robert would drill that into their heads. Money's created in your mind, boys. It's created in how you think, not at a job. And, that's how that works. Don't know how else to say it.
Speaking of education, I think your boys have had a great financial education. They're very financially literate. Now, what role does that play in inventing money?
Well, when you read Rich Dad Poor Dad, I think the most illuminating page you could argue in that book is when the author said, this is the cash flow pattern of a poor person. And then the author said, this is the cash flow pattern of an asset. And those two pages, in that book speak really loud to me. They did to me when I read it. It was probably what really hooked me on the book more than anything else. So if we want to know how to create money, we see an asset creates cash flow. We see an asset in the asset column. And, the brilliance of Rich Dad Poor Dad is he used arrows instead of numbers. So we could see how cash flowed and where it came from. And so cash flow is created from assets. And so a person in their brain thinks, how do I create an asset? And if you can't create an asset, then go buy one. And if you don't have any money to buy one, then borrow the money and go buy one. Or use leverage by contract and use an option, right? It's just that creative process. Another way to think of it is, if I'm going to control an asset, if I can't create an asset, but I want to control one, a lot of people will look at a stock and they'll say, okay, the stock's at $100. How high might it go? Is NVIDIA going higher, right? Is there a semiconductor company going higher? Boeing's had trouble. Should I buy it now because it's going higher? They're always asking how high the stock could get at the current price. But where a creative mind and a financial education mind might look at that same asset, they say, okay, that stock's $100. How do I control it for $5? Or this real estate project is $10 million. How do I control it for $0? How do I get a hold of that and start benefiting that by putting none of my money in? And so that idea of infinite return, of getting close to zero, helps you create assets on your balance sheet. What was not on your balance sheet now is. And so you've created an asset on your balance sheet, or acquired it, or however you want to say it. How do you go from not having an asset to an asset? I'll plug, I'm tempted, it just comes to mind. I'm tempted to plug StockCast bonus, because that's really part of what that free download does, is say, how do I take an asset column that's empty and put something in there? Well, most people think, all right, the asset's $100. I guess I have to have $100 to buy the asset. That's not true. You can create an asset or take control of that asset for less than $100 through leverage. And it doesn't have to be debt leverage. It could be contract leverage. We have no debt leverage. We talk about all the time. And I remember I was in Peru with Robert, and we were on stage, and it was kind of a cool moment, because we talked about getting to zero, to where you're acquiring things with no money. That's true creation, isn't it? When you can create an asset without having to put money into it, that's real alchemy. I mean, that's really Rumpelstiltskin. That's spinning straw into gold, man, or nothing into gold. And so that's very, very real. Infinite return is real. You need to look no further than Wall Street to see examples of this. If, there's two sides to every coin. And they always say, if you're at the table, at the poker table, and you don't know who the sucker is, it's you. Remember that saying? Well, if you look at Wall Street, they create money out of nothing. The 401k program, how much money does Wall Street put into the 401k, put into your 401k? How much did they contribute to your 401k? Zero. But yet they get cash flow from the fees. Up, down, or sideways, rain or shine, boom or bust, recession or growth, they're going to get paid. So they take no risk, they put in no money, and they create a massive asset for themselves. I mean, just imagine this. Vanguard, there's $11 trillion in 401ks in just my home country, the United States. That doesn't count the RRSP in Canada, or the superannuation in Australia, or the 401ks. They stole our name for Japan. Globally, it's far more than 11 trillion, but just in the United States, it's 11 trillion. Vanguard's probably got a little under 2 trillion of that. And they didn't put any of that money in there, not a dime. Everyone else funded those funds mutually, right? Mutual funds. And they get paid a fee, even if it's 0.5% or 1%, which is enormous, according to Warren Buffett. and they just created an asset that has no risk for them, that has only income for them. So it happens all the time. And when we say the rich invent money, well, they're rich and they're inventing a cash flow stream simply by creating a process called a 401k. They create a 401k, and it really benefits them. Boy, they're great winners in that program. Of course, if the winner's on one side of the coin, there's probably a loser somewhere as well, or someone who's at least not doing as well. So it's everywhere. Creating cash is everywhere, whether it's a software guy that creates some code and now it's an asset. We have AI, someone creates that and now it's an asset. Share in that, own assets, learn how to create them on your financial statement, and off you go. I mean, think about it. The compounding, we were in a coaching session. Corey says, watch this. Click get paid by making a promise to buy stocks. And they took that cash that he got by promising to buy a stock, and then he went and bought stock. created it right there, like 8 clicks I think it took to do it. Just astounding. Creating a new asset in the asset column by simply promising to buy a different one. Incredible. And that's how it flies.
That's amazing. And I have one more question, but just a random fact, and I want to quiz you here. 2 sides of the coin. On the round the coin, there's ridges. Do you know the reason for that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I know the reason. I know what people say the reason is. I haven't researched it, but if you have a round coin and you want to shave a little bit of the gold off of that, maybe you take a little shave off the edge of that coin and make it a little smaller and put those shavings in your pocket. But if I put ridges on it, makes it a little tougher for that to happen. I don't know if that's true.
That it is
that's
true.
That's what I've heard. So that's what the rumor is.
They would take the shavings, boil it down, and they would make their own coins. Hence, they were inventing money.
Yeah, by stealing it. That's not the best way to invent.
That's something else, though. That's not what we're talking about.
That's not where we want to do it. Yeah, that's not where we want to do it.
So,
let the 401k steal the compounding power. They steal the majority of the compounding power because they steal the top percent. That'd be a great podcast someday. Andy, what does Warren Buffett mean? Why is 1% enormous? That's worth a podcast someday. Because I like that. If you steal 1%, each percent is tiered, and the top percent is the most enormous growth you get. And if a fee steals the top percent, they've shaved that coin in a huge way. So that would be a cool podcast someday. We ought to write that down and talk about how 1% really is enormous, because it's just ungodly huge. It's big.
All right, I think we'll put that in the mix. All right, final question.
Billions.
If someone wants to start practicing this concept of inventing money, what's one action they can take this week?
Well, we always encourage people to act on StockCast bonus. That's why we have that there, because that's a free resource people can have. But you should have a paper trade account. Great golfers get on the putting green, the driving range before they hit the course. They hit some balls on the tee before they go out on off the driving range first. Having great mentors. I mean, there's any number of steps you can take. Who's your mentor? When it comes to real estate, who's your person that you look to, or people? When it comes to stocks, general financial education. Who are your really good mentors? Number 2, decide to be a serious student. Decide what a serious student is and be one. And look around and ask yourself, am I a serious student? Have I come to that crossroads where I invest my time, energy, and money into learning in a very serious way and not a superficial way? What does it mean to be a serious student? A kid going to med school, pretty serious about medicine. A guy watching Vimeo or a TikTok on, the latest heart surgery, well, they're superficial student. They haven't taken the dive in yet. So become a serious student. Who's your mentors? Go to our site and use our calculator. Start building your rat race escape plan. Put some numbers to it. Get your financial statement out. Put the 6 numbers on there income, expenses, net income, assets, liabilities, and net worth, and put those 6 numbers out there, see where you're at. How do I change them? There's any number of tasks you can start to do. Show me your financial statement. If you can't, go put it together so you could. So many steps people could take, but I would start, if you want an easy one and you don't know which one of those to do, we'll start at StockCastBonus.com. Go there, download it, read it, and do what it says to do, with a priority on the doing, not just the consuming of the content, but the application of the content. People consume lots of content. They apply almost none of it. There's so much dopamine in the scrolling, where people say, hey, you should do this or this, that, or if you want this, do this. I mean, a lot of rhetoric, but the consumption of content is massive right now. The application of content, not so much. And which I like what Dana White said: if you're at all a savage, you'll crush in this world. If you're at all a savage, because there's so few people that do stuff, you become a doer, you'll crush. That's my opinion anyway.
I share in the same opinion. Well, that wraps up this episode of Rich Dad StockCast. If you take one thing away from today, let it be this: the rich aren't lucky; they're leveraged. They use knowledge and creativity to invent money, and so can you. And a huge thank you to Andy Cannon for always making these ideas actionable. And if you want more tools, more strategy, more education, head over to StockCastBonus.com. It's your go-to resource for building a smarter, more empowered investing plan, help you to get out of the rat race, like Andy said. And make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment, share this episode with someone who's ready to stop trading their time for money and start inventing their future. Thanks for listening. I'm Denney. Stay smart, stay invested, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.